Hi guys, welcome or welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my March reading wrap up. March overall was a good reading month for me. I do feel like the month started out pretty strong and then I kind of lost steam along the way. The last couple books I read for the month, they just took me forever to get through. I was just slogging through them, and not because I didn't enjoy them, but I just wasn't really in a reading mood. I feel like I just didn't read as much as I was hoping or wanting to in the month of March. So going into April, I am feeling a little bit slumpy, but all the books I did read in March, I rated 3 stars or higher. So my goal that I set for myself last month of not rating any books below 3 stars was accomplished. I'm going to try to keep that up for the month of April as well. I did have a 5-star read and a new favorite in the month of March, which I am so excited about, and lots of books that I did enjoy reading and would recommend to you guys. So let's just jump right in. The first few books I'm going to talk about were in my first reading vlog that I posted for the month. I did a realistic week of mood reading. So if you want more of my thoughts on these next few books while I was reading them, definitely check out that vlog. The first book I read is Addicted to You by Krista and Becca Ritchie. This feels like I read it so long ago. I think because I actually started it in February, but it ended up being the first book that I finished in March, and I read most of it in March. But this is the first book in a very long series. It's technically 2 series, the Addicted and Calloway Sisters series, which you read intertwined. So it's just a lot of books in this series, but I've heard so much about these books. People love them, and I had been wanting to read it for the longest time. Addicted to You follows Lily and Lo. They kind of grew up together as childhood family friends, and they're now college age at the time we're following them in this book. And they have this fake dating relationship because they both struggle with addictions. Lo struggles with an alcohol addiction, Lily struggles with a sex addiction, and they pretend to be in a relationship so that they can hide their addictions from their families, but behind closed doors they both enable one another's addictions. I gave this book 3.5 stars, and I'm really glad going into it I knew that this series takes a few books before it picks up and before you get into it, because I think if I had just heard all the hype and went into this expecting great things, I would have been a little disappointed. But I think my expectations going into it were pretty realistic. I definitely liked this book. It was hard to read because you're in Lily's head the whole time and she is struggling with an addiction, so it does get a bit repetitive and it is sad, and it's just like a cycle of addiction, and it was hard to read about. I do feel like these characters are gonna have to grow on me. There was some things where I wish there was more backstory, and I didn't feel super invested in the characters because I hadn't spent that much time with them yet. I also kind of feel like some things were thrown at us that didn't have a whole lot of lead up, and like I said, I'm hoping there's more backstory maybe in future books. Also, the way some of the side characters were introduced, it felt kind of forced and random. So again, there was explanations for some of that, but I'm hoping the more I read, I'll just learn more about these characters and grow to love them. I do really see the potential, especially for the found family, but I just don't feel super attached and connected yet. But I am excited to continue on with the series. And then I actually listened to the audiobook of Big Swiss by Jen Beagin. This is a literary fiction that I saw so much on Bookstagram last year. I feel like all the trendy literary fiction girlies were loving this, and the premise sounded so interesting. Basically, we're following this woman named Greta, and she is a transcriber for this sex therapist. So she gets to hear all these recorded sessions between clients going to see this sex therapist. She transcribes them all, and she ends up kind of becoming obsessed with this one client in particular who she refers to as Big Swiss. And then they kind of end up meeting in person, and it follows the aftermath of that as well as their relationship. And I gave this one 3 stars. It was probably my least favorite book that I read for the month, but there were things I liked about it and things I didn't. I feel like it wasn't completely what I thought it was gonna be. I was hoping it would be a little bit more juicy and just full of so much interesting gossip. I thought the story would kind of be structured differently, to where we're getting all of these sessions between clients and the sex therapist and getting all this drama and tea. That's one of the reasons I listened to it on audio. I thought it would be good to consume that way. But really, we're focusing a lot on our main character Greta, her backstory, her life outside of being a transcriber, which I didn't care for her too much as a main character, so I wasn't super interested when the focus was just on her. I did really like Big Swiss's character, and I found her backstory to be super interesting, but Big Swiss and Greta's dynamic was not my favorite for reasons I can't say because it's a spoiler spoiler, but I couldn't really root for them. There were probably an equal amount of things I liked in this one as well as things I didn't like, but overall I just don't think it was completely what I was expecting. Then I read Swift and Saddled by Lila Sage. I actually read this one on my Kindle. This was a new release that came out in March and one of my most anticipated releases because it is book 2 in the Rebel Blue Ranch series. It's the book that follows Done and Dusted. I read Done and Dusted last year and really loved it. I was looking for another cowboy romance after finishing Chestnut Springs, and Done and Dusted was just perfect. It really hit when I read it, and I just fell in love with this series and the characters, and I was so excited about the characters book 2 follows. In Swift and Saddled, we follow Wes and Ada. Wes is the brother of Emmy from the first book, and we're following his romance with the interior designer he hires to help him fix up one of the houses on the ranch. I think initially I gave this book 4 stars, but looking back on it, it might be like 3.75. I keep going back and forth because I gave Done and Dusted 4 stars and I liked this one just a little bit less. I really enjoyed Wes's character in this book. He's definitely the golden retriever man, which is my favorite kind of male character to read about. The way their relationship was set up, I can see where it wouldn't work for some people and might feel a little bit insta-lovey and lusty, but I think the way that Lila Sage did it was flawless and I loved the execution of their little meet cute. I feel like the book for me started out a lot stronger than it finished. I was like kicking my feet, screaming, giggling at the beginning. I was obsessed with them, but then I don't know, I feel like there were some subplots that kind of got brought up and then just were only mentioned 1 or 2 times, and I feel like there could have been a little bit more depth. But overall, this was a super cute cowboy romance. I highly recommend this series. These books are so quick and easy to read, and I am very excited for book 3. And then I actually listened to another audiobook. I listened to Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty. If you've been watching my videos for some time, you will know that I love Australian thrillers. Sally Hepworth is one of my favorite thriller authors, which I would say, I guess her books are classified as thrillers, but it really is more like suspenseful literary fiction, women's fiction. And the author she gets compared to the most is Liane Moriarty. So last year I dove into Liane Moriarty's backlist. I read, I think, 4 of her books last year and really enjoyed them all. So I knew that I had to get to Big Little Lies sometime this year because it's definitely her most well-known popular book. I feel like even if you haven't heard of Liane Moriarty, you've probably heard of Big Little Lies because of the show. And I always say this, but I highly recommend both Liane Moriarty and Sally Hepworth's books on audio. That's the way I've consumed all of them because they are narrated by Australian narrators and it makes you feel like you were in the story, and it just sucks me in and immerses me so deeply, and I think it's just the best reading experience. So Big Little Lies follows 3 different women. We're following Jane, Celeste, and Madeline, and each of them come from different backgrounds. They have different backstories, very different family dynamics, but each of them have children that attend this same school. So that's kind of how all of their lives intersect and they are connected, and we're following them getting all of these women's backstories and what's going on in their day-to-day lives. But the plot of the book is kind of leading up to this big event that happens at this fundraiser night at the school, and it's alluding to something very bad happening. We don't know what exactly happened, but that's kind of the climax that it's leading up to. And I loved this book so much. I gave it 5 stars. It is a new favorite book for me. It's probably gonna make my favorite books of the year list by the end of the year because I was obsessed with it. I just found the characters to be so interesting. I was so deeply invested in them and their stories, so much so that I was like, even if the climax of this book isn't that shocking and I predict what happens, it's not that exciting, this book will probably be 5 stars for me because I just love the characters that much. As long as the climax doesn't negate how I'm feeling about my favorite characters and change their personalities or anything like that, I felt like it was going to be a 5-star read for me. But I was listening to the audio. I remember I was cleaning my bathroom when the climax was revealed, and I looked up at my face in the mirror and I was like, my jaw was on the floor. I did not predict that reveal at all. It had me shook, and I thought it was so well done. So many things in this book were so well done. It touches on really heavy topics, but in a way that's really palatable and makes the book not feel like a heavy, sad story. Even though sad things are being brought up, they're very real things, and I just love the way that they were written and talked about. I feel like Liane Moriarty brought about new ways of thinking of things that I had never thought of, and it made me look at different topics in a different perspective and in a different light. light, and I just thought it was so well done. I absolutely loved it. And I did start the show. I've only watched about 3 episodes. I think the casting is great. They kind of added this one storyline that was not in the book at all. I feel like they did it just to add more drama, but it makes me not like this one character who I really liked in the book. I don't know. I'll probably continue it out to see how everything else is done in the show, and I know they made a 2nd season, which is really interesting because I think it continues where the book ended and they kind of added their own storyline to it, so I would be interested in seeing that. But I do think the book did a better job at like being in these women's heads. It just takes a better deep dive into their characters. But I absolutely loved the book so much. It is definitely a new favorite for me. Then I read The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. This is another one I saw all over Bookstagram last year. It's Irish literary fiction, which is one of my favorite things ever, and this book was getting really good reviews and ratings, and it was getting compared to Normal People, which is one of my favorite books ever. I was like, I have got to read this book in 2024, and I actually read almost the whole thing on St. Patrick's Day, which the Irish vibes, it really hit for me. This book is definitely more of a character study, slice of life type of book. It's definitely more vibes than plot. In this book, we follow Rachel and her best friend James, and they are roommates, and we just kind of see them navigate life together. I think they start out in their late teens, and we see them grow up through their 20s. It's definitely a coming of age story. We're kind of seeing them navigate different jobs, different relationships, family issues, different friendships, and I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. I feel like the comparisons to Normal People, I don't really see it. I wouldn't compare this to Normal People. I think aside from the fact that it's Irish and it's coming of age, their writing styles felt completely different to me, so I didn't feel like it was very much like Normal People. But I did find the characters to be so endearing, and I really enjoyed following them. I do feel like the whole time I was reading this though, it was walking a very fine line of like just keeping my attention enough. It was almost bordering on being boring, but then on the other side of that, it was like very close to me being obsessed with it. Something about it, it was just like constantly walking a fine line. Like I would be pulled out a little bit and then something would bring me back in. I do feel like the ending was really strong and really pulled everything together, and I wasn't expecting that. I kind of like how it brought something up at the beginning and then you kind of forget along the way while you're reading, and then the end brings it all together and reminds you of what was brought up at the beginning and kind of explains it. So I liked how that was done. I don't think I'm gonna think about this one all the time. Like I don't think it's really gonna stick with me, but it was a solid, enjoyable book and I had a good time reading it. Okay, the next 2 books I read were my highest and lowest rated books on my TBR for the month of March according to Goodreads. So I did a video reading both of them. So again, if you want more thoughts while I was reading these books, definitely check out that video. The book that was lowest on my TBR for the month is Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams. This is book 2 in her When in Rome series, and I was not the biggest fan of When in Rome. I gave that book 2 stars. I found it to be a bit boring and bland, but I'd heard people say that you either like one or the other. You definitely have a preference on which you prefer. So I was hoping that since When in Rome didn't really work for me, that this one would. And it was giving me very much spring vibes because Annie, our female main character in this, owns a flower shop. She is the sister of our male main character from book 1. She's very much like the good girl, sunshiny character. Will, our male main character in this, is Amelia from When in Rome's bodyguard. He's supposed to be more of like our bad boy character, but really on the inside he's very much a softie. I was a little bit hesitant going into this just from what we saw of Annie's character. I thought she might be a little bit too much of a goody two-shoes and just kind of like cringy, just certain things she did in When in Rome. But I ended up being very pleasantly surprised by her character in this book. I found her to be very relatable, and you kind of see that even though she has this reputation of being the good girl, she's kind of trying to break out of that mold, and she's trying to date and find her dream man, and Will helps her do this by helping practice dating with her and giving her tips and advice, and then it ends up following their romance. So I gave this one 3.75 stars. I thought it was cute. I thought it was fun and enjoyable. I felt so giddy when I was reading The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams, and I didn't quite feel that when reading this book. I did feel like Will and Annie had really good chemistry, and even though Sarah Adams is supposed to be known as like the clean romance author, I feel like there was still a strong physical connection between both of them as well as that emotional connection. I mentioned this in my video. I will say, I feel like even though Sarah Adams is supposed to be a closed door author, to me this wasn't completely closed door. There was nothing explicit, and I definitely would say no spice in this book, but things were definitely talked about and mentioned. I would say it was a little bit more fade to black, especially more so than When in Rome. But I did like this one. I liked Will and Annie's dynamic. I feel like they both brought good things to the relationship to balance one another out. I liked them individually as well as I liked them together, and they both had strong backstories. And I did like how there was more of a storyline to this book, with Will teaching Annie how to date. And When in Rome, I kind of felt like it was plotless and I didn't enjoy the characters, so I didn't really feel like I was getting much out of that book. But this book definitely gave everything to me that I was wanting. I just feel like in the middle it kind of started to drag, and I was hoping it would pick up, but I did enjoy it overall. It was cute, fluffy, fun, but still had some depth to it. And then for that same video, the highest rated book on my TBR for the month was Saving Six by Chloe Walsh. This is book 3 in the Boys of Tommen series, so if you're unfamiliar with the series, book 1 is Binding 13, book 2 is Keeping 13. Both of those books follow the same couple, Johnny and Shannon, whereas books 3 and 4 follow a different couple, Joey and Eva. And Joey is Shannon from the first 2 books' brother. I remember being so surprised when I heard that books 3 and 4 were going to follow Joey and Eva, because what we see of them in books 1 and 2, for the most part, they are already together. They are a pretty solid couple. But in this book, we really are just getting Joey and Eva's backstory. We literally see them from the first day that they meet when they're 12 years old, and we get to watch them grow up together. I gave this book 4.75 stars, which I wouldn't say was a disappointment for me. I was kind of hoping I would love this book as much as books 1 and 2, which were my favorite books of 2023, but I didn't quite connect to Joey and Eva's characters as much as I did Johnny and Shannon. This book so far for me, I would say, is definitely the heaviest and definitely the hardest to read. Definitely check trigger warnings if you're thinking of going into this series, but emotionally prepare yourself, especially before going into book 3, because being in Joey's head and seeing how much he carries on his shoulders, how he feels he has to protect his family as the oldest brother in the household, was just so heartbreaking to read about. I definitely think Joey deserves the world, and I'm just hoping that we're gonna get the happiest of endings for him and Eva in the next book. This book for me was just almost too much misery and too much darkness. I feel like books 1 and 2, even though they covered heavy topics, I feel like there was still an uplifting and hopeful undertone, whereas in this book, sometimes it was like I couldn't even see the light at the end of the tunnel. It just felt like so much darkness. It was definitely a cycle of misery. Things would be good and smooth sailing for a little bit, and then something bad would happen, and it would just happen all over again. So in that way, it did get a little bit repetitive, and in some ways I kind of found Eva and Joey's characters to be frustrating. I definitely wasn't expecting their backstory to be the way it was. I kind of thought it would be smooth sailing from day one, just based on how we see them in books 1 and 2, but it very much is not like that. They are frustrating, they have trouble communicating, and it did make me mad at times. But Chloe Walsh just knows how to write the most complex, deep, emotional characters that you get so sucked into. I love her writing so much. I just didn't connect to this one quite as much as books 1 and 2. And then I read Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I actually picked this book up very early on in the month. I featured it in my first vlog that I posted, and I didn't finish it in that weekly mood reading vlog, but I did say that you'd hear my final thoughts in my wrap up, so I was very determined to finish this by the end of the month. And to be honest, I kind of lost interest along the way. I put it down and just didn't really have much interest in picking it back up, and I was reading other things. But like I said, I was so determined to finish it, to give you guys my final thoughts and my wrap up. And I just wanted to know for myself too what I was gonna think of it. This book is very different from Ali Hazelwood's usual romances she writes. This one's a paranormal romance. In it, we're following a vampire named Misery, and she is arranged to marry this werewolf named Lo. The weres and vampires have kind of been feuding for years, so their marriage is supposed to be like this alliance and this symbol of unity and hopefully bring about peace. Misery has some things going on in her own life that kind of motivate her to want to enter this marriage. She's hoping that she can find some things out when she enters into were territory. I gave this book 3.75 stars. I really enjoyed the world building. I really enjoyed the storyline. That subplot of mystery was so interesting to me, but I think that I really liked the friendship, and there was even like a child in this book, and I really liked Misery's relationship with her. I liked that dynamic more than I liked the romance. Not that I disliked the romance. I definitely believed in the chemistry. I definitely liked them together, but I even think I liked the characters Misery and Lo individually more than I liked them as a couple. I don't know why. I don't know if it was the whole Omegaverse thing. This is my first experience testing the waters with the Omegaverse, and I didn't hate it, but I don't know if it's completely completely for me. I definitely enjoyed my time reading this, and if you are interested in it, I would recommend it. I don't think this will be for everyone. I can see why this book gets mixed reviews. I also think the ending set up for a book 2, which I think would be fun to read about, but I don't know. This is definitely the lowest I've rated any of Ali Hazelwood's books, so I think I like her women in STEM romances much better. But I do appreciate that she's branching out and trying new things. I thought this was really well done, and I really like that our main female character in this had that like quirky, typical Ali Hazelwood protagonist type traits. I feel like you can open an Ali Hazelwood book and just know it's her voice and her writing. It's very unique and distinct, and I think she's so smart. I think she can write anything well. Kind of some mixed feelings on this, but overall I did enjoy it. And those were the 8 books I read in March. Let me know what you guys read in March, what you liked, what you didn't like. If you've read any of the books that I read in March, let me know all your thoughts on them. If you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of my future book videos. And I will see you guys so soon in the next one. Bye guys.